Akua here. I also respond to Aqua and Ikea. And today is day 3. I can't believe it. Can you believe it? Day 3 of my 5-day leadership in 2022 leadership series. And it's just been, I think, from my perspective, just a lot of fun to share some of my thoughts around the top trends. The top skills that leaders at any level really need to keep in mind to really make the most of 2022. Really just recognizing that over the last 2 years, all of us have been going through so many different things. And especially those of you who own their own businesses, run a business, or even work within a business, which is probably the majority of us. And maybe the majority of you listening to this. And I think that I've been sharing some really top tips that are incredibly actionable. So if you haven't had a chance to already register to not only get the replays, but to also make sure that you get the reminders and also the workbook that I have. And specifically with this one, I think that you want to really make sure that you download the workbook, because I'm going to be sharing 10 questions that you can keep in mind to rebuild, to build, to really reimagine and improve relationships that you have within your business, across your organization, within your company, and even potentially maybe helpful within your life as well. And I think it is so key for us to get incredibly intentional right now with how we are leveraging and thinking about our relationships, because for so many of us, our relationships have really changed, right? Working remotely, not being able to be physically present with some of the individuals that we're working with or collaborating with or partnering with has made it quite challenging for so many people who never thought they'd be showing up or working in that way. And I really think that reimagining relationships through using some of the questions that I'm going to be sharing will be incredibly helpful for those of you who are listening. So once again, if you're just joining, I really would recommend that you take a second to register to get the replays, the reminders for the rest of the week, and also, of course, download the workbook that has the specific questions and also space for you to write down notes as well. So make sure that you do that. So I think a key thing for all of us to keep in mind in terms of this topic today is that none of us work within a vacuum, right? None of us work within a vacuum. Even if you work for yourself, you are still leveraging others. You still need to connect with others. We live within a system where you do need to generate some level of income for yourself. So really thinking about those relationships, whether, once again, these are interns, people who work for you, people who work with you, people who are partnering with you, will be incredibly important. All right. So let's get into the slides. If you're joining me on Instagram, you unfortunately cannot see the slides, but you are once again encouraged and welcomed to make sure that you register to get the replays. And on the replays, you'll be able to see the slides, or you can join me on some of my other social media channels and accounts to be able to see the slides as I'm talking. So this first slide I have here, just really simple. I put relationship in parentheses building, simply because I think that for so many of us, we think that the first way that we enter a relationship, or the first sort of impression that we've given someone, is the only impression that we have to give, that there's no way to go back, to change it up, to switch it up. And I really would just encourage you to reflect, take really a second to reflect on, where is it that I might be missing something? Is there someone that I maybe need to rethink about in terms of how I'm showing up, how I'm engaging with them, how I'm supporting them even? And I think that it's never too late, especially within your professional life. When you are building out your team or thinking about the people that you support you, even if it is investors, there's always an opportunity. You always have the time to make sure that you are thinking about how to make the most of that relationship, and making sure it's a relationship where they're also getting something out of it as well. One of the first things that I learned, or really once again helped me shift my perspective on how I was showing up as a leader, was keeping this really simple thing in mind. And this simple thing was, what's in it for them? And I know for some of you listening to this, that might be a difficult thing to hear, because I think for so many of us, we like to pretend, and I'm going to use the word pretend, which once again might not be something that resonates with you. But from my perspective, I think sometimes that we like to pretend that we do things for other people, or that we're doing things the word is not necessarily for other people, but that we're always doing things out of the goodness of our heart. And I think, there are times when we are willing to do things for other people to some extent, but we're also getting something out of it, right? Whether it's like, I do this so that my mother doesn't complain anymore, my mother doesn't bother me anymore, right? Or I'm doing this because this is an opportunity to get additional exposure or visibility. There is always something that's given in exchange, right? For whatever we're doing, whether we're doing it for no financial gain, whether we're doing it for someone who's important to us, there is always going to be something that's exchanged. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. One of my favorite things that I actually did when I first started off was actually do a little retreat or just a little workshop with a bunch of members of a nonprofit. And one of the things that I started off the session with was like, what's in it for you? Why are you even here? So even if you are volunteering within a nonprofit or volunteering within an organization, it's so important for you to get clear on your why and really recognize that there's nothing wrong with letting others know what is it that you want out of this opportunity? What is it that you want out of this volunteer position, if that's what you're doing, and really recognizing that there is so much confidence that can really come from it. And it's incredibly empowering to be able to share that with others. And so that's sort of the perspective that I wanted to take when thinking about this particular, this particular training, right? Just really recognizing and maybe even thinking about some of the content that I shared earlier on, that people do things for their reasons, not yours, right? And there's actually a slide that I'm going to share and I'll get to in a second in the slide deck that I have, this very short slide deck. But before I do that, I want to just make sure that I just reintroduce myself for those of you who are maybe joining me for the first time. So I'm a certified executive and leadership coach. I run my own business. I've had the opportunity to be featured, I think, in some really interesting places. Primarily in West Africa, because that is where I'm based and where a lot of my work experience comes from. For the last 3 years, I've been working with leaders, honestly, all around the world. And really just been an incredible opportunity for me to really support people, whether it's through my one-on-one coaching, whether it's through my workshops and facilitating, or whether it's through some of the products that I've built, with really just trying to get clear on where they should focus their time and energy. Because I think for a lot of the people that I support, and I tend to support high achieving leaders. So that is founders, business owners. I've worked with leaders at all levels who've achieved so much, they've gotten so much done, but they still feel like their time and energy is not being used in the right places. So all the content I put together, including this training, is all about helping you really focus on those trends, right? And those topics that I think are so important for you to spend your time and energy on, right? There's so many other things that I could have chosen to share, but I think that these are the key things that when you start with them, everything else will tend to fall into place. So I just wanted to, for those of you who are watching this with the slides, to just once again reiterate why it's so important to really think about improving relationships or rebuilding relationships. And that's simply because, and I mentioned this earlier on, none of us are working within a vacuum. None of us are living within a vacuum. So both in your personal and professional life, you want to make sure that you're getting the support that you need so you can actually show up, right? And if you do decide to work, whether it's working for yourself or others, that you have the time, that you have the energy, that you have the mental capacity, the emotional capacity to do so. And that's why it's through cultivating your self-awareness, right? So that first step that I take my clients through, simplifying engagement and finally setting expectations, you can really make sure that you're improving your relationships across your organization, across your company, or even across your life. And what I wanted to try and do in this conversation or within this training was really help us rethink or reimagine some of these relationships that we have, especially now that so many of us are actually connecting virtually, right? And so it's time for many of us, and I'm sure some of you have actually already done this, but maybe it's time to actually write this down, or it's time to communicate this to others. It's time for us to really cultivate our awareness around how we're showing up if we have to work from home. Right? What's happening for us as we work from home? How do we communicate now that we work from home and that we maybe can't meet people physically or see them or just show them something and point it out right away? How are we showing up? It's probably very different from how we show up within an office space. Okay. And then that second piece that maybe you want to start to reflect on, and we'll start to go through with these questions that I have here is, how do I actually want to engage? How do I show up? How do I make sure that people are going to understand what I'm trying to communicate? And really recognizing that, once again, as all of us are working in very different ways, working on hybrid teams, working remote teams, maybe not always being able to meet physically, how we engage is also going to have to change as well, right? And if I'm thinking specifically about how this shows up for me, or what comes up for me when I share this, is thinking back to when I was working for a high growth startup. I started actually working in Accra, Ghana. They took me to Lagos, Nigeria, but I still had my team in Accra, Ghana. And so I was having to work with them remotely. And this is a few years ago, way before the pandemic. And having to start to really just reflect on, how do I need to show up differently as a leader? What are the things I need to share? How do I want to engage with them? What is the time I need to set aside for that team to make sure that when I'm not there physically, right? So when my team is in Accra, but I'm in Lagos, how is this going to work? How can I make sure they know what direction to go into? How can I make sure that they're not burning out and I'm not burning out? How can I make sure I'm getting the support I need to make sure that this platform is able to move forward, right? So really just recognizing these are just really simple mind shifts that you can keep in mind, really simple steps that you can keep in mind to just improve your relationships right there, right? And then the last bit is really around setting those expectations. And once again, in remote settings, in hybrid settings, setting expectations is just an incredibly important component, right? So previously, once again, maybe you could walk over to somebody, you could give them feedback, you could let them know that something isn't working, and maybe you felt really comfortable with that, right? It was okay doing it in person. It didn't maybe feel as aggressive, or it just felt a little bit better, right? And I think that so many of us have resistance to trying to communicate or share feedback when it is not done verbally or in person. So I would love to, once again, just encourage you to just reflect on, how are you showing up in this current time, in this uncertain time, if that's something that resonates with you, around setting expectations for yourself and others. Are you sort of feeling like, well, I don't need to set expectations, or it doesn't really make any sense because nothing's going to happen, or it's not going to go my way? So really just reflect on how you're showing up and what that means about what you might need to shift or change in terms of how you are setting expectations, engaging, and also what you've learned about yourself, right? What is something new that you've learned about yourself as well that you might need to use moving forward? All right. And I think that when I reflect on setting expectations, and once again, this is something that I've gotten even better at. And I've mentioned before, and I think yesterday I mentioned that I'm trying to get some additional support, more long-term support in my business so I can scale it, and really recognizing that in terms of setting expectations, like, I need to go beyond just writing words down. So I'm recording videos. I actually send audios, right? I'm like, hey, record that screen so I can see what's happening and where you're getting stuck. So it really might, or 2022 really might be the year where you really need to take a step back and get really clear on a different way of showing up and a different way of setting expectations, so you can get that support that you need, so you can build that business, so you can build your career, so you can get that promotion. All right. So those are just some of the things that I wanted to share. Just trying to connect this back to my 3-step process. I call it the See Better method. This is what I teach, and this is what I use in any of the trainings that I do, any of the speaking engagements that I have, and just really helping people think about how they can show up, right, where they need to focus their time and energy so that they can get whatever they need done. All right. And if anyone has any questions about that, you can feel free to just, leave it in the chat. Let me know what you think. Any thoughts, really. I always love some feedback. So this next slide that I have here is, I just want everyone just to take a second and just get a little intentional with this, right? Let's really make this as actionable as possible. So I'd love for you to reflect on, is there a professional relationship that you want to improve? Is there a professional relationship that maybe you want to reset? And just really recognizing that it starts with one. And what I used to do when I had a team was actually start with one person. And I think that, once again, some of you listening to this, one of the biggest objections that I get is, oh, I have too big of a team. This is not something that I can implement. This is not something I can do. And I always love to push back or play devil's advocate or provide an alternative perspective where it's like, well, if you don't have the time and energy to think through some of these pieces with members of your team, then you probably are managing too many people. Or you need to think about how you're spending your time and energy, because ultimately, if you're a leader, it is your job to make sure that members of your team have the support and have the resources they need to be successful. And it's sometimes through thinking through these pieces where you're going to be able to provide them that. So let's get really intentional with some of your important relationships, and let's ask ourselves, is there a relationship maybe where you're struggling with them? You feel like there's a loss of productivity or quality. You feel that communication is lacking. You feel that they're really not able to collaborate with you. And if you've come up with a person, I'd love for you to hold this person as potentially an example of who you want to use some of these questions with. And once again, if you're just joining and you haven't had a chance to actually download the workbook, I really recommend that you download the workbook, because that's where all the questions will be. I will not be putting all the questions up on the slides. I'll be talking through some of them to help you think about how you can coach yourself through this process to really come up with concrete steps, concrete next steps that you can take to really build better relationships one person at a time. And once again, this relationship could be with any type of stakeholder. It could be with an investor. It can be with a client. It can be with a colleague. But really reflect on, is there a professional relationship that you want to improve? And as you go through this, and I mentioned this previously, but as you go through this, just remember, right, that main mind shift. This is something that I always keep in mind. Anytime I get upset, anytime I'm like, oh, things aren't going my way, they're not doing what I want, something's missing, they're not communicating the way I want, I just really try to remind myself that people do things for their own reasons. They're not doing things for my reasons. And it's so important that we reflect on, right, how is it that I'm showing up? Who am I, while cultivating my self-awareness, or recognizing that I don't know them, right? They aren't me, first and foremost. So I need to cultivate my self-awareness. I don't know them. So I need to engage with them to have a better understanding of what's important to them, how they show up, how they communicate. And finally, right, they don't know what I want. And so it's so important for me to reflect on, what are those pieces? What are those expectations I need to set, and how do I need to set those in order to be successful, so all of us can really move forward? So what are some of those questions that you can really ask yourself? And I call these sort of the 10 powerful questions that you can ask yourself right now to sort of cultivate your awareness to better engage and achieve your expectations, right? And so we're going to start with just one professional relationship. I hope you have that relationship. You maybe written it down, or you've typed it into the little workbook that I've shared. And let's go through this. The first thing I'd really love for you to do in relation to thinking about this relationship is just reflect on, what is the goal of this relationship, right? And I know for some of you that might feel a bit transactional, but stick with me, trust this process. I promise you it's worth actually reflecting on this, right? But just really think to yourself, what is the goal of this relationship? Okay. And as I'm going through this, maybe what I will do is just think about one of my most important relationships that I'm trying to build right now, and that's with my VA. And so the goal of my relationship with my VA is to really make sure that they have all the resources they need to really support me, right? And so by supporting them and making sure that they have all the processes in place, making sure that I've given them everything they need to be successful, I ultimately will be successful. I'll be able to scale my business. I'll be able to work with more clients. I'll be able to have more speaking engagements. So really reflect on, what is the goal of this relationship? And if you have a nagging voice in your head that's like, meh, that's too transactional, or meh, like I don't want to think about it from that perspective, I'd really encourage you to sort of work through that, because I think that that is something that we need to get a little bit more clear on. And there's nothing wrong with recognizing that there are things that come out of having these relationships. All right. I'm going to take a quick sip of water, and then I'll get into some of the other questions. Okay. So the next thing that you want to think about is, what is that end goal, right? So you've come out, you've hopefully thought a little bit through, what is that ideal outcome? And so thinking about now, where are we? So where are we currently? And is there a gap, right? So once again, if I'm thinking a little bit about where I am with my VA, she's just getting started. I know that I'm starting to feel a little impatient. So I have some awareness around some impatience coming up, but I'm also trying to remind myself, hey, she's just starting off. Literally, it's been like a week. Like there definitely needs to be some time and space and some grace given. So recognizing that, hey, she's maybe not where I expect her to be right now, but she will get there, right? And I just need to give her time. Okay. The next bit is sort of thinking about it from their perspective. So really going to that place of, what is it they want? What is it that resonates with them? What's important to them? And one of the things that I always wanted to make sure of the people that I hired, especially when I was running teams in both Ghana and Nigeria, was trying to understand what is it they wanted to get out of this opportunity. And so for a lot of the individuals that I worked with, they just really wanted that first time work experience. They wanted to work, within a fun environment. They wanted to learn, and learn. And so really just trying to get an understanding of what matters to them or what matters to a specific unit or department, right? So if you're thinking about the relationship from that level, I think can be incredibly helpful. The next piece is continuing to just engage with that. So you've thought a little bit about, what might they want or what matters to them or what's in it for them. Start to really just reflect on how are they showing up, right? If you were to look at them, what would you say their communication style was? What is their way of showing up? What are their values? Thinking about what could potentially influence them and who else could potentially support you in influencing them, right? So if we're thinking about relationships from this perspective of being within more of a corporate setting, are there people around this individual that could potentially help to influence them or help you communicate to them what's really important? The next step is thinking a little bit about where you might be willing and open to be flexible within this relationship or within having a conversation with them. And, just really recognizing in this case, when I think about willing to be flexible and not, that's really where you're setting, those expectations. So for me, in my mind, if I'm thinking about the support that I'm getting right now, how long will I, give this individual the opportunity to just be learning, right? When do I need to start seeing results? So it might be from that perspective, right? So it might be from the perspective of what are their KPIs, what are their targets, and how long and what support will I give them to help them get there? And when will I say, hey, enough is enough. This might not be a good fit, or we might need to think about another way of doing this, or maybe even potentially firing people. So it's really important to start to reflect on that as well. Other things that you can start to think of is what sort of objections or resistance might come up as you start to build that relationship. And once again, that's kind of trying to keep in mind what's important to them, what matters to them, right? And really just thinking through some of those pieces can help you have much better conversations with them and really start to build a relationship that's effective, right? Really start to build a relationship that's a win-win on both sides, all right? The last thing I would just suggest that you start to do as well is just really reflect on how you can make sure that you are creating time and space to just even reflect on just reflect on this relationship, because that's a key thing that I think is so very important. And so many people won't necessarily create the time and space for that, right? So they might be only thinking about how can I, have a better relationship with this person on the fly, right? So it's only when they're having the conversation where they're starting to think through these pieces. And I'd really recommend that you set time aside prior to having this conversation or prior to starting this relationship or prior to thinking about how you want to reestablish this relationship to just think through some of these questions within this workbook. All right. So today is a bit of a shorter conversation, but I still think it's a very important conversation to share with you and also for you to have with yourself, right? So first and foremost, really start by thinking about, are there specific relationships that I maybe want to improve, I want to rebuild, or maybe even I want to seek out? And what are some of the things that I need to keep in mind around cultivating my self-awareness, really thinking about how to simplify engagement, and then sort of setting those expectations for myself and others to make sure that it's a win-win. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to listen. If you have any questions, any comments, any thoughts, please feel free to leave a comment and also feel free to DM me as well. I've had so much fun sharing some of these tips and thoughts with you. Tomorrow, we're continuing the 5-day series. So please make sure that you join me there. And please make sure that you register so that you can make sure that you get the workbook and that you get the replay and reminder emails. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.